The sun was out. It was a strange kind of day for January in Boston. The air felt warm, not cold like it usually was in winter. People were going about their business. It was January 15th, 1919. A Wednesday. This was the North End, a busy place back then, full of people, immigrants mostly. The Irish, Italian. They lived in tenement buildings, tight spaces, but it was home. They worked hard. Children played in the streets. Life was loud. It was full of smells, too. Cooking smells, ocean smells, and one other smell. A sweet, heavy smell. Molasses. There was a big tank in the North End. It stood next to Commercial Street, near the harbor. It was huge. Really, really big. It was built by the Peary Distilling Company. They made industrial alcohol. The molasses was key to that. Alcohol was in demand, especially with the war just ended. World War I needed alcohol for explosives, and for other things. The tank was metal, with steel plates. It was 50 feet tall. That's like a 5-story building, and it was 90 feet across. It was a giant drum. It held more than 2 million gallons of molasses. Think about that. 2 million gallons. That's a lot of anything. But molasses is thick, it's heavy. 1 gallon of molasses weighs about 12 pounds. So 2 million gallons? That's 24 million pounds. 24 million pounds of thick brown goo. The company built this tank in 1915. They built it fast, they wanted to get it done, they didn't take their time, and maybe that was a problem. People said it made noises, creaking sounds, groaning sounds, right from the start. People living nearby heard it, they worried, they even complained, and it leaked. Not a lot at first, just drips. But then more. Seams on the tank would weep molasses. Dark, sticky streaks ran down its sides. It looked like the tank was crying. Kids in the neighborhood, they knew about the leaks. They would sometimes collect the molasses, a sweet treat, but it was also a sign. And a sign that maybe something was wrong. A big tank like that shouldn't leak, not a brand new one. The company knew about the leaks too. They said it was fine. They painted the tank a dark brown color. That made the leaks less noticeable, but the problem was still there. Under the paint, the steel plates were not strong enough. The rivets holding them together were not enough. The design was poor. The foundation was weak. It was a massive structure, holding an immense weight. And it was not built to handle it. The people living around it, they didn't really have a choice. The tank was there, they lived their lives, they smelled the molasses, they saw it. They mostly just got used to it. It was part of the North End landscape, a big dark monument to industry, standing right in their backyard. But that day, January 15th, 1919, was different. The warm weather played a part, the molasses inside the tank was cold, it had been shipped from the Caribbean. Then, it sat in the cold Boston winter. But then, the temperature shot up. It went from near freezing to over 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This change in temperature made the molasses expand. It put more pressure on the already weak walls of the tank. More stress on those poor rivets. Nobody thought about it that way, though. They just enjoyed the sun. Lunchtime was coming. People were heading home. Or to work. The elevated train rumbled overhead. Life was going on, just like any other day. But something was building. A silent pressure. Inside that big tank. Just waiting. And then it happened. It was around 12:30 p.m. A sound came first. A rumble, like thunder, or a train coming fast. Some people said it sounded like cannon fire. A deep boom. But it wasn't thunder. It wasn't a train. And it wasn't cannons. The giant tank burst. It ripped apart, like paper. The metal plates tore open. Steel shattered. Rivets flew through the air. They became like bullets, shrapnel. And then the molasses, all 2 million gallons, little 24 million pounds. It exploded out. It didn't just leak. It didn't just flow. Like a dam breaks, a wave formed, a huge brown wave. It was 25 feet high. That's taller than most houses. It moved fast, really fast, up to 35 miles an hour. Like a train, maybe faster. It swept through the streets. It roared. People heard it. They felt it. They saw it coming. But there was nowhere to go. No time to react. The wave hit everything. It hit buildings, tenement houses. They crumbled. They were flattened. Like they were made of matchsticks. It hit the fire station. Firemen were having lunch. The building was ripped from its foundation, carried away. People inside were trapped. It hit the supports for the elevated train, big steel girders. It buckled them. The train tracks bent. An elevated train car was thrown from the tracks. It landed on its side in the molasses. horses, wagons, cars. They were picked up, tossed around like toys. The wave was not just liquid. It was a force. A heavy, sticky, dark force. It swept people away. Kids, adults, or men. Women, they were caught. They were in the path. People were in the street, walking home. Or to the docks. They were just going about their day. 1 minute, it was a normal Wednesday. The next minute, a wall of molasses. A wall of death. It covered everything. It suffocated. It crushed. It broke bones. The wave moved quickly, but molasses is thick. It's not like water. It doesn't just flow and then disappear. It pushed, it stuck, it clung, it trapped. People tried to run, but the molasses was too fast, it was too strong, it filled basements. It filled cellars. It filled the lower floors of buildings. People were caught inside their homes. They were caught on the streets, they were caught trying to escape. The air was filled with the smell. An overpowering sweetness, but it was a smell of horror now, not of something good, not of a treat. The sweet smell of molasses mixed with the screams, with the sound of collapsing buildings, with the cries for help. The North End changed in an instant. It went from a bustling neighborhood to a disaster zone. A place covered in a thick, brown, sticky goo. Buildings were gone. People were gone. The landscape was unrecognizable. It was a scene of unbelievable destruction, all caused by a tank of molasses. A tank that was supposed to be safe. A tank that was supposed to hold a simple ingredient. The wave moved into the harbor. It pushed a fireboat. It covered it. It lifted it. The boat was damaged. The water in the harbor turned brown. For days. Maybe weeks. It was thick. It was slow. It was molasses everywhere. And then it stopped moving. The initial wave crashed. It settled. But it left behind a scene of absolute chaos. Death. Destruction. And a sticky, silent horror. The silence after the roar was almost worse. Only broken by the sounds of suffering. The cries. The groans. The pleas for help. And then the rescue started. The air hung heavy, not just with the sweet, sickening smell of molasses, but with a profound silence. The roar of the wave was gone. The crash of buildings had stopped. Now, there were other sounds, cries, groans, the frantic shouts of people trying to help. The North End was a mess, a thick, dark, sticky mess. Buildings were gone, or they were twisted, broken. People were trapped under rubble. In the molasses itself, it was everywhere. It was deep. In some places, it was waist high, or even higher. Police were first on the scene. Then firemen, but it was hard to move. Every step was a struggle. The molasses was so thick. It pulled at your feet. It held you back. It was like trying to walk through glue. But glue that went on for blocks. People started to try and help each other. Neighbors. Same strangers. They pulled people out of the goo. They dug through the debris. It was slow work. And it was dangerous. More buildings could fall. Parts of the tank itself were still sharp, twisted metal. And the molasses was cold. It was winter. The initial warmth was gone. The molasses cooled quickly. It got even thicker. It made things worse. People stuck in it got hypothermia. They froze. Or they suffocated. The weight of it, the stickiness. It was hard to breathe. If you were face down, you were gone. And horses were caught too. Many of them died. They were strong animals, but they couldn't fight the molasses. They were trapped, crushed, suffocated. It was a terrible sight. The rescue efforts were messy. There was no real plan for a disaster like this. Who would have a plan for a molasses flood? So people did what they could. They used anything they had: ropes, ladders, bare hands. Identifying people was hard. They were covered in molasses from head to toe. It filled their eyes, their mouths, their hair. It clung to their clothes. It was hard to tell who was who. The dead were everywhere. 21 people died that day. Some were crushed, some drowned, some suffocated. Their bodies were covered, hidden. The search for them went on for days. Sometimes weeks. It was a grim task, finding bodies in the thick brown goo. The injured were many. Over 150 people were hurt, broken bones, cuts, bruises, but also unique injuries. From being hit by the wave, or from being pulled through the molasses, getting the injured out was a huge challenge. Carrying them through the sticky mess was incredibly difficult. Hospitals filled up. Their doctors and nurses worked nonstop. They had to wash people first, clean them of the molasses. It was everywhere. It was hard to get off. It stuck to everything. And then they could treat the injuries. The smell, it was always there. Overpowering, sweet, but also cloying, sickening. It got into everything, it filled the air, it was a constant reminder of what had happened. A constant reminder of death and destruction. The area was a disaster zone. The Coast Guard sent firefighters. They tried to clean the molasses, they used fire hoses, but it didn't just wash away. It spread. It moved. It got into the sewer system. It flowed back into the streets. It flowed into the harbor. The North End was a place of shock, of grief, of disbelief. How could this happen? A tank of molasses. It seemed impossible, but it did happen. And it changed the lives of everyone there. Those who died, those who were injured, those who saw it, those who survived. They would never forget. The city tried to bring order. They put up barricades. They kept people out to let the rescue teams work, to let the cleanup start. But the scale of it all was overwhelming. It was a sticky brown nightmare, one that would take a long, long time to clear. If it ever truly could be cleared, the molasses seeped deep, into the soil, into the memory. The immediate horror passed, but the lingering problems, the mess, the pain, that was just beginning. The immediate horror of the wave was over, but the mess it left behind was huge. The North End was covered in molasses. It wasn't just on the streets, it was everywhere. And it seeped into buildings, into basements, into homes. It got into cracks, into every nook and cranny. Cleaning it up was a massive job. It took weeks, many weeks. Some say months. People worked day and night. Firefighters used fire hoses. They pumped salt water from the harbor. They tried to wash the molasses away. But molasses isn't like water. It doesn't just flow. It sticks. It clings. It's thick. When they hosed it, it just pushed the molasses around. It spread it further. It didn't just disappear. It got into the sewer system, and then the sewers backed up. Molasses flowed back out of manholes onto the streets again. It was like a never-ending cycle. They brought in sand. Lots of sand. They dumped it on the molasses. The idea was to soak it up, to make it less sticky, to make it easier to scrape away, but it was still incredibly hard work. Shoveling molasses, scraping it. It was heavy. It was stubborn. The molasses stained everything. Buildings were brown. Streets were brown. The harbor turned brown. For a long time, everything smelled of it. The smell was everywhere. It got into clothes, into furniture, into people's hair. It was a constant, sweet, sickening reminder of the disaster. People living in the North End had a hard time. Many lost their homes. Their possessions were destroyed or covered in molasses. They had to try and clean their homes, but it was almost impossible to get rid of the smell. And the stickiness. Some people just gave up. They moved away. They couldn't stand it anymore. The psychological impact on survivors was deep. Imagine seeing that wave. Seeing your neighbors die. Seeing your home destroyed. The trauma was real. People had nightmares. They were jumpy. The smell of molasses could trigger flashbacks. It was a scar on the community. A hidden wound. The physical landscape of the North End changed. Some buildings were gone forever. Others had to be rebuilt. The area near the tank was completely different. The elevated train structure had to be repaired. For a long time, the North End was a place of rebuilding, of recovery. The story of the molasses flood spread far and wide. It was such a bizarre disaster. Who could believe it? A wave of molasses? It sounded like something out of a strange storybook. But it was real. And it was tragic. It made headlines across the country and the world. People were fascinated and horrified. Even years later, the smell of molasses would linger, especially on hot summer days. The sun would warm the ground, and the faint, sweet smell would rise from the soil. From the cracks in the pavement, it was a ghost of the past, a reminder of that terrible day. Some people said you could still smell it decades later, a constant whisper from history. The city tried to move on. The community tried to heal, but the molasses flood became part of Boston's story. A dark, sticky chapter. It showed that even something as ordinary as molasses could become an agent of immense destruction. If not handled with care, if not treated with respect for its power, it wasn't just about cleaning up the physical mess. It was about cleaning up the emotional mess, the fear, the grief, the anger. That took much longer. And for some, it never truly went away. The memory of the molasses wave was etched into the heart of the North End. A strange, unique tragedy that would never be forgotten. The tragedy of the molasses flood led to a reckoning. People were angry. They wanted answers. Who was responsible? How could this happen? The victims and their families wanted justice. They sued Purity Distilling Company. The lawsuit was long, and it was complex. It dragged on for years. Over 5 years. This was a big case. A landmark case, really. It became known as one of the first class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history. Hundreds of people were part of it. The families of the dead, the injured, property owners whose homes were destroyed, businesses that were ruined. The trial started in 1920. It had many witnesses. Engineers testified. They talked about the strength of steel, about the pressure of liquids, about how tanks should be built. They looked at the shattered remains of the tank. They examined the steel plates. They looked at the rivets. The plaintiffs, the victims, argued that the tank was poorly built. They said it was not strong enough. They said the company knew it was leaking. They said the company was negligent. They did not care enough about safety. Purity Distilling, on the other hand, tried to shift the blame. They claimed it was an act of God, a natural disaster. They even suggested sabotage. Maybe anarchists blew up the tank. This was a time of social unrest, so they tried that angle. But it didn't stick. The expert witnesses for the victims pointed out many problems. The steel used was not good enough. It was too brittle. The seams were not properly riveted. There were too few rivets, and they were not strong enough. The foundation was weak. It settled when the tank was filled. No proper blueprint or calculations were made for such a huge structure. The judge, Justice Hugh Ogden, took a very active role. He listened to all the testimony. He ordered investigations. He even visited the site himself. He wanted to understand everything. He knew this was important, not just for the victims, but for future safety. In the end, after many years, the court made a decision. In 1925, Purity Distilling Company was found liable. They were found negligent. The judge ruled that the company's negligence in building and maintaining the tank caused the disaster. The tank's design and construction were indeed faulty. The company knew about the leaks. They ignored the warnings. They put profit ahead of safety. The victims received compensation. It was not a huge amount for each person, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement of their suffering. Their families of those who died got money. Those who were injured got money. Property owners got money to rebuild. It didn't bring back the dead, it didn't erase the trauma, but it provided some relief. And the Molasses flood left a lasting legacy. Beyond the compensation, it led to changes. The building codes became stricter, especially for large industrial structures. Companies were now held more accountable. They couldn't just build huge tanks or factories without proper oversight. There had to be inspections. There had to be safety standards. It taught a harsh lesson that even something as seemingly harmless as molasses, when contained in a faulty structure, could become a deadly force. It showed the importance of engineering integrity, the importance of public safety. Today, there is no tank in the North End. Where it once stood, there are sports fields. There is a small plaque, a simple memorial. It lists the names of those who died. It reminds people of what happened there. The Boston Molasses flood remains a strange and unique part of history. It's a story people tell, almost unbelievable. But it's also a serious reminder. A reminder of corporate responsibility, of community vulnerability, and of the powerful consequences when corners are cut. When safety is ignored, it's a dark, sweet stain on Boston's past. A story that still makes people wonder. A wave of molasses. Imagine that.